I'm getting started on the Ancient Pottery Challenge for Season 5 this week, and I'm starting with that big Pinto Polychrome bowl. As you can see, I've already built the bowl, and I'm ready to start adding slip. But I don't have enough of that white slip I need mixed up. So I need to put some more of that clay in this container and add a little water, and then I need to just let it soak for a while. That way it's nice and smooth and there's no lumps in it when I apply it to the bowl. So I'm gonna let this clay sit here and soak for a few hours before I do anything with it. So while this is soaking, let me take you back and show you how I built the bowl. And then by the time you get caught up, we'll be ready to start adding slip and paint, and we'll take you all the way through the firing process. Let's get started. Most Salado Polychrome is made with brown clay, but Pinto Polychrome is unique. It was the first, the earliest Salado Polychrome, and it's made in a very confined area in central Arizona. And if you go to some of those ruins in that area, you find that while some are made with brown clay, a lot of them are made with this gray clay and are tempered with shirred temper. This is presumably pots that are made on the Colorado Plateau where the geology is very different. And so today's pot, the pot I'm making here, is meant to represent those Pinto Polychrome pots that were made at the source, the place where Pinto Polychrome originated, there on the Colorado Plateau. And as this video goes on, I'll talk more about that source and that location. But just know that this clay that I'm using comes from within just a few miles of that location. So once I mix up clay from dry like this, I like to pour a little water in it, put some holes and fill them with water, and then let it sit for a day or so. And that'll make a nice, good plastic clay body. So I'm going to leave this sit until at least tomorrow before I start building. I'm using this glass light cover as my pookie because it's the only one I have that's the right size and shape. And then I'm just using this handkerchief to keep the clay from sticking. I'm also going to be using a gourd scraper and a primitive needle tool. And of course, here's my clay that has been sitting for a while and is ready to go. When you're making a bowl this size and this big of a pookie, a big part of your job is just getting a big slab of clay to put into that pookie. Do I need a slab roller or a rolling pin for this? No, I don't. I made this slab by hand. Of course, feel free to use a slab roller or a rolling pin if that floats your boat. Once I get that slab all smoothed out and pressed into the form, I'm ready to start the coiling process. So I just start rolling out coils and attaching them and scraping them smooth. I've gone into the details of this process in other videos, so I won't bore you here by doing it again. In 1994, an archaeologist named Diane White looked at Pinto Polychrome in that area of central Arizona where it was most common. Her research seemed to indicate that the point of origin for Pinto Polychrome, that some of the earliest and most prolific potters for Pinto Polychrome were located in the north of that area at the southern edge of the Colorado Plateau, long before the invention of Pinto Polychrome. At a time when redwares were just catching on, Mogollon potters began decorating redware pottery with black, organic painted designs. This type, called Sholo black on red by archaeologists, was the very first oxidized organic painted pottery. And it was made in this area for hundreds of years, from about 1030 until the late 1200s. In the late 1200s, a new design style was sweeping the region, what archaeologists today call Pinedale style. This combined the interplay between solid and hatched elements that we find in ancestral Zuni Tularosa style and the stepped frets that we find in ancestral Hopi Kayenta style. At first, potters applied this new style to the same red slip they had been using in the same organic paint they had been using and produced Pinto black on red, which technologically is almost identical to its predecessor, Sholo black on red. Then somebody got the idea of using a white slip on the inside of the bowl instead of a red slip, and Pinto Polychrome was born. The pot I'm recreating today is in the private collection at Q Ranch, so I've actually seen and handled this pot a number of times. But I never thought to take measurements. So when it comes to the size, I'm not exactly sure. I'm guessing around 15 inches, but I could be off a little more or less. But I am measuring it as I go and trying to be careful to make sure that it's roughly the same size and shape as the original. This gray clay that I'm using today is softer than what I usually use. And so I'm going to have to go away and leave this for a little bit to firm up before I add more coils because it's getting a little soft and I'm worried about breaking. So sometimes when it's like that and you have a soft clay, just give it a little time and come back when the clay is firmer to keep building. Okay, so at this point I only have one more coil to add. So I'm just trimming off the top to make sure that when I add that coil, it's relatively level and the coil can kind of build up evenly so the end results don't look like a roller coaster, you know, kind of up and down and up and down. In 1996, Susan Stinson looked at Pinto Polychrome to try to determine where all this Pinto Polychrome was being manufactured on the southern edge of the Colorado Plateau. She used petrography analysis. This is the study of the small grains of sand that are in the clay body, the sand that potters add to the clay as temper to make it be able to withstand drying and thermal shock. Through petrography analysis, you can look at those grains of sand that are in the ancient clay bodies and kind of determine where it was made based on the types of minerals that are found. She identified the Bailey ruin as the likely source of the Pinto Polychrome. She also identified a number of pukis at the Bailey ruin, whose mineral composition exactly matched that of that gray-bodied Pinto Polychrome that was spread all over the region. So I've actually been to Bailey Ruin a number of times. It sits on the Apache Sitgraves National Forest, so it's a place where you could actually go and hike around and explore, you know, without picking up artifacts. But a great place to kind of imagine what life was like back then. And the area is rich in clays and pigment minerals. So the clay that I'm using here to make this pot came from a couple of miles away from Bailey Ruin. And the yellow slip that I'm going to be applying to the outside of this bowl, pretty quick here, it also came from close to Bailey Ruin. In fact, closer than the clay itself did. I made a video about exploring the Bailey Ruin for clays and minerals a couple years back, and I will put that link down in the doobly-doo in case you're interested in seeing that area. Okay, so let's talk about flipping a pot like this over. You know, a bowl like this is relatively fragile. A jar is a lot more sturdy because it kind of holds itself together. You could easily just scrunch this bowl up if you weren't careful. So I'm using this piece of plywood to flip the bowl over to work on the bottom. And I'm curious if you have any better ideas of how the ancients might have flipped bowls over that were sitting in a puki. Because you do have to flip it over and clean up the bottom before it's fully dry. So if you have any ideas, let me know, because I really don't think they were using plywood. The biggest problem with a glass puki is that it's impermeable. It does not wick moisture away the way a ceramic or a plaster of Paris puki would do. And so the bottom isn't really drying properly. The top of the bowl that sticks out of the puki is drying, but the part that's down in the puki, the bottom, is quite damp still. And so I need to kind of equalize the moisture because as a pot dries, it shrinks, and if it shrinks unevenly, it can literally tear itself apart. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm actually taking this plastic bag and I'm just going to tape it up around the base of the pot, actually the top of the pot because it's upside down. And that way I can leave the bottom kind of exposed to the air and let it dry for a few hours before I finish scraping it because it's still really, really soft at this point. And then here I'm just finishing up cleaning up the bottom after a couple hours of letting the bottom dry more. All right, it's a day later. Pot is ready to go. I got the slip all mixed up and ready to go. It's got the right consistency to it. So I'm going to start by slipping the inside of this bowl. Once I get the inside all slipped satisfactorily, then I will flip it over and slip the outside with red. One thing I need to be cautious of while I'm working on it is that the rim doesn't get too dry, because it is fairly warm and dry today here in Tucson. So I'm just going to wet the rim, and I'm going to try to keep it wet as I work because the rim has so much more surface area than the rest of the pot. It will dry out real fast if you're not careful, and then you'll get cracks. So just Keep the rim damp and then get slipping on the inside. Looks pretty good. I think it's just about the right texture for adding slip now. This is that smectite clay slip. This is the secret ingredient to getting organic paint to work. So organic paint doesn't just work on any clay. It has to be applied to just the right slip. And that slip has super absorbent quality, so it grabs that organic material, kind of locks it away or binds it in some way so that it's more difficult to burn out. And then the firing has to be just right too, in order to achieve those black carbon designs when you're done. Now I sell this on my website if you want to try it, but for the most part, it is rare and it is special. Now the yellow I'm using, this is what I was talking about earlier. This comes from near the Bailey Ruin, and it's kind of a yellow ochre / clay, but it's not really a true clay. And that's why I always go over it with a smooth stone right after I've applied it and kind of set it into the damp clay. Makes it more permanent, less likely to wipe off after firing. So I'm covering the whole outside with this, and this will fire red because it is an iron oxide. Because the pot is still rather damp, this is a very gentle polish. I'm just barely putting any pressure, just riding over it with the stone. Now here is the first of a couple of mistakes I make on this pot. Most Pinto Polychrome, prehistoric Pinto Polychrome, the white slip was polished on the inside. Now, I shouldn't have done this, and I'll show you at a later point in this video why. Well, I broke it. I wish I'd have caught it on film to show you. Let me tell you the story. So the body clay, this gray body clay that I formed this out of, it's got some salt or gypsum or something in it, something water soluble that's white. And so if I'm making whiteware, you never notice it. But if I slip it, if I'm making polychrome and I slip it with like yellow or red, then as the clay dries, this white water soluble mineral migrates to the outside and forms a little bit of a coating, a little bit of a white dusty layer. You can see it on here. This yellow isn't as bright as when I first slipped it. And that's because this white is starting to appear on the outside as it dries. It's moving from the inside to the outside. As the water evaporates on the outside, it's leaving a deposit on the slip. So as this dried, it was developing. Just today, this was right before my live stream. So today is the day that I had that live stream on Sunday, December 17th. And it had been sitting out here drying all morning. And before I moved it out of the way for the live stream because I needed this workspace to do the live stream. I moved it over onto a different workbench, and I just had a bandana, and I was just wiping some of that away. So a lot of it can be just wiped down with a cloth, and it just kind of comes up, and you can see the layer on the cloth, the white material. And I was getting a little, physical with it. I was pushing too hard, and it cracked. It cracked right under my hand as I was doing it. I saw it happen, and it's heartbreaking. There's nothing you can do at this stage. It's way too dry to try to fix the crack. It's a crack. Basically, this is going to break into 2 bits. There's no point in continuing with this bowl to do the decoration and such. I'm going to have to start over. I've finished up the second bowl. So now that I've made 2 of these, this video has taken me something like 3 weeks to make at this point. So I need to paint the good one without the crack. The plan is to get this all painted today and tomorrow, and then fire it Monday or Tuesday, if the weather holds out. We'll see how that goes. Pinto Polychrome was traditionally painted with organic paint. I make this paint from boiling down mesquite beans. I have a video about how I make it. I'll link that up above and down in the doobly-doo in case you want to learn more about it. And these are yucca brushes. I'm soaking them ahead of time to soften the fibers. Let me tell you about something weird that happened. I took this bowl and I put it in my oven because I wanted to make sure it was really dry before I put the paint on so that organic paint would soak into the slip really good. And I ran the oven up to about 500 degrees. And the yellow slip turned red. It oxidized in my oven at like 500 Fahrenheit. Okay, second day of painting. Let me tell you about yesterday. I got my framing lines in and I started to get thinking about how to put in those spirals. Those spirals are really the hard part. So I tried painting the spirals I wanted on the broken pot, the previous one I'd made. It didn't come out so good. In fact, it proved to be a lot more difficult to accomplish than I assumed it would be. So then I went in and I practiced drawing the spirals on a notebook a number of times. And doing that, I was able to kind of work out how to approach the spirals. Once I had done that and felt I was relatively comfortable with it, then I took a pookie I'd made. This is an unfired pookie. And I practiced painting the design from this bowl on the inside of that pookie. I got 2 spirals painted in that pookie, and they're not perfect. They're certainly not nearly as good as the original, but they're okay. And so I think I'm ready to go on this. I thought about drawing in the design with pencil first, and I've decided against that. But what I am going to do is I'm going to make a compromise, and I'm going to put aside the yucca brushes and use commercial brushes, at least to kind of get the design outlined. Maybe I'll use the yucca brushes for filling in all the cross-hatching and stuff, but I think for the outlining of the design, it's going to be a lot easier with a commercial brush. In taking the time to work this symbol out on paper, I found that the only way to make it come out even with the right distance between each spiral is to start in the center and work out. And in starting in the center, the most surprising thing to me is it starts with this symbol right here, which is called the Hopi Nagwatch symbol. I'm probably mispronouncing it. It's a symbol of brotherhood. I'll link to some information on this down in the doobly-doo, but pretty surprising that this spiral symbol, which is a cool spiral symbol, actually has at its heart a symbol of brotherhood. So I freehanded the spirals after I'd worked out how to do it on paper, and they came out pretty good, as you can see. And really, to me, the spirals are the hard part. If you look at the picture of the original pot, it is unbelievable how even and smooth all those lines are. The person that painted the original was a master and was really competent, especially at painting. I mean, I'm not the greatest painter in the world, by a long shot. There's a lot of replicators who are a lot better painters than me. In fact, it's probably my weakness in replication. It's not really so noticeable in replicating a lot of pots, but when you do one that's painted as fine as this, then my shortcomings in painting really stand out. The most time-consuming part of painting it is, of course, this hatching. This pot is loaded with hatching. This took me a long time to do. I usually speed up the video of painting because it is so slow. But for this hatching segment right here, I've left the video at normal speed so you can get an idea of just how long it takes to paint in all those little narrow parallel lines. I think the results are totally worth the effort. It can be very frustrating, especially when you're close to the end. The end is in sight at this point. You're anxious to get the project wrapped up. As soon as you get that finished painted, you can take it out and fire it. Pottery replication and primitive pottery are fun because there's a lot of different aspects of it that you can get into, a lot of things to learn. But that same thing about it also gives it a very steep barrier to entry, so it's hard for new people to get started in it. For example, in this video alone, we've already talked about mixing clay, forming pottery, finishing and slipping pottery, painting designs, design meaning, not to mention things like archaeology and geology. So learning all these things can take a lot of time. And you can do it all yourself. There's nothing wrong with that. That's how I did it. But if you want to make some really good progress and learn more quickly, then you can't do any better than the Ancient Potters Club. We meet every Wednesday night over Zoom, and while we make pottery, we talk about all these things, mixing slips, archaeology, geology, all these things, and learn and get better and share information. And so you should look into that if you want to make some progress. I'll put the link to that on the screen here and down in the doobly-doo, and I hope to see you on Wednesday night in our Zoom pottery class. This is what's called the primary fire. I'm just trying to preheat the bowl to make sure I've driven out all the moisture that might be in that clay body. If you saw that last firing video I did where I blew up that St. John's Polychrome bowl, I'll put a link to that up above and in the doobly-doo if you want to see that. Anyways, I blew the whole bottom out of this bowl, made a wreck of it. And that was because bowls, large bowls like this, are very hard to preheat properly, especially on the bottom or in the very center of the middle. And so I'm being especially careful, having had an accident recently, to make sure that this bowl is properly and thoroughly preheated before I start stacking the fuel around it. The wood I'm using here is mesquite, and as you can see, I'm keeping the diameter really small. They're all just sticks, basically. And the reason is I want this fire to burn hot, but I want it to burn relatively short duration. I want it to burn down to ashes within 15 minutes. So by keeping the fuel small, you can make the fire not burn so long. And that is because this is organic paint. If I burn it too long or I get it too hot, I could burn those designs right out of that bowl. About 700 on the upwind side. Try the downwind side if I can do it without getting burned up. Can't see the red dots. There they are. 821, 817. We're over 8 on the outside there. We are definitely hot enough. All right, let's talk about how I did real fast. I think it came out pretty good. There's no cracks in it. It's fired nice and hard. I don't know how the organic paint did. The trouble is I don't usually polish that smectite slip. And in this case I did because I was trying to do Pinto, but I'd never done Pinto before. I have had problems with polishing smectite in the past. So we will see how it did. As I wipe it off, you can see that I did get good black in places, but it's a little patchy. It's got some areas where there's very little black showing. It's just really patchy. So that's probably related to polishing that slip. And I probably shouldn't have done it knowing that I'd had problems with it in the past. And nobody would have noticed if it was unpolished Pinto anyway. But you know, it's something to try, something new. And it's not terrible. You know, it's a nice bowl. It just, as you can see, the black is a little, you know, off and on in places. Overall, pretty good, I think, to start off the Ancient Pottery Challenge this season. The next one is going to be that Sholo Polychrome jar, which I plan on starting next week, so look forward to that. Thanks for coming with me today. I'll catch you next time.